Hello everyone, welcome to another brand new class of human physiology. This is the 7th week. Hopefully you have learned through all the last few slides for till week 6 and you are enjoying the classes. In the 7th week we will go through various bone structures, joint structures, muscles, their functions and different diseases of bones and their treatments. Hopefully this 7th week will be enjoyable and let's start with it. So today in the class mostly we will go through about bones, human bones, what are their functions, different type of bones, overall the skeletal system, structure of bones, composition, bone tissue type, bone cell types. We will also see detailed mechanism of how the bone cells are growth, like overall bone growth happens, and then also few laws related to bones. So mostly today's class will discuss in around with the bones of our human body. Now let's start with the skeletal system. We all know, right, the whole skeletal system in our body is basically divided with the two sections. One is the axial section. You can see the axial section, if you see the components of it, first one is the skull and then you have like the rib cage, like this is the rib cage area, and then we have the vertebral column or this spinal area. So as a whole you can see like this is the axial part of the skeleton system, and then we have the appendicular skeleton system, where mostly we have this upper proximities, and along with that also we have the lower proximities. Apart from that, pelvic area and shoulder area. So distinct two part, one is the axial division and then second is the appendicular skeleton. So what are the functions of this? Basically, as we all know, in general skeleton system provide us the structural integrity. So basically our skeleton gives a structural type of support, and also it protects our vital organ. For example, all the intraperitoneal organs, lungs, heart, everything gets protected by our skeleton system. Bones and skeleton system as a whole also helps in terms of our body movement. It also acts as a levers. For example, we can also do like load bearing application using our bones. And lastly, but very importantly, bones are also storage house of the minerals. Several important crucial components of mineral are present in the bones that overall helps in our human body growth and maturation and development. So we all know that total how many bones are present in our body. If you see the number here, we have in the human body around 206 bones. So if you again divide the bones in the axial section and the appendicular section, you will see the number. In the axial section we have around 80 bones, which are mostly, I told in the last slide that axial part of the skeleton system consists of our skull, right, and also it contains the rib cage and the spinal cord. So almost around 80 total bones are present in our axial component of the skeletal system, and some of them are like cranium, face, hyoid, vertebral column, thorax, etc. And then if we go to the appendicular section, you will see like in the appendicular section how many we have, around 126 number of bones. So axial have 80 and then the appendicular one we have around 126 bones. And as you know, like lot of important bones like fibula, tibula, patella, femur, these all are like leg bones. Apart from that, many other bones, all together we have 206 type of bones present in our body, and each of them has different functions, but most importantly they give us structural support, they help us to do like in terms of movement, in terms of load bearing applications, and house of various minerals. Next, if we see in detail about that what are different type of skull bones, you will see like in our skull we have one frontal bone. So, in the frontal region, this region we have one bone, then we have two parietal bones, right. You can see in this parietal region we have two parietal bones. Then in the occipital we have one occipital bone here, you can see, right, one occipital bone, and then we have two temporal bones in the temporal region, right, two temporal bones, and one sphenoid bones and one ethmoid bones. So, total about 8 skull bones we have present in the skull. And very importantly, as you see this region, right, frontal lobe, occipital lobe, parietal lobe, exactly below of those skull bone we have the, what we have present, we have the brain, and in part of brain exactly under the frontal bone you will find the frontal region of the brain, under the occipital bone you will find occipital region of the brain, under the parietal bone you will find the parietal region of brain. Okay. So, again in the brain class we will discuss about the brain structure and function, but just for remember you can like kind of remind this part. So, now also it is very important to tell that skull has another 14 facial bones, right. So, if you see what are different facial bones we have like two inferior nasal cocci, we have two lacrimal bones, we have one mandible, two maxillae, then we have two nasal bones, two palatine bones, one vomer, and two zygomatic bones. So, these are mostly part of inside of our facial area, right. So, how many total skull has how many total facial bones? We have total around 14 facial bones, and if you go to the last slide one more time, if you recapitulate, we have around 8 cranial bones. So, in together we have 8 cranial bones and total 14 facial bones. So, total around 22 skull bones we have in our skull. Hope it is clear. Then very important next component of the axial part is the vertebral column. So, as you see this beautiful vertebral column, and you all know like how important our spinal cord is in order to provide us like a agility, movement, a balance during our movement. So, spine basically holds off like the whole balance of our body system, and if we see like our spinal cord contains series of irregular shape of bones called vertebrae, and this is the house of the spinal cord, as you all know. So, what are different division of spinal cord? You can see we have around 7 cervical vertebrae. This is the cervical area, right. So, here we have around 7 cervical vertebrae, C1 to C7. These terminologies or notations are very important in case of like medical physiology, because if there is any issues of any vertebrae, for example some degeneration or slip disc or any type of other diseases like inflammation, or even in rare cases like cancer, doctor needs to do the imaging and identify the exact location of the vertebrae where they need to operate. So, after the C1, C7, the cervical region, we have 12 thoracic vertebrae, this is like T1 to T12. Then we have 5 lumbar vertebrae, L1 to L5, and finally lastly one sacral and one coccyx. Coccyx is also, you know, it is called as the tailbone, even though during the birth the coccyx is little bit taller, and slowly with the age it goes slower. The size become little bit smaller, right. So, overall how many then vertebral bones we have? If you total the number, you will see like we have total of 26 vertebral bone. So, C1 to C7, T1 to T12, L1 to L5, and then one sacral and one coccyx. This is very important, and also during our spinal cord and the nerves, we will see like how the nerves generally kind of goes from this vertebrae, and those nomenclature also kind of similar to the location of this bone. Okay, we'll see that later in our neuron and nerve classes. Then what are different type of bones present in our body? So, mostly we know what, like we have long bones, right. Like if you see here, you will see like these are kind of the example of long bones like tibia, fibula, and then we have like short bones like in our arm, in our hand, we have various like short bones, right, in the wrist bones. Then there are like flat bones which are generally like thin and composed of two nearly parallel plates of compact bone. There are few like irregular bones, mostly in the vertebrae, just in the last slide we discussed, those are irregular bones, and they have some complex shapes also, and they cannot be grouped into the previous category. And finally, there are some bones like called sesamoid bones. They develop inside or near to the tendons like patella. In our knee area, you can see some sesamoid bones also. So, in the leg you can see lot of long bones, in the wrist area you can see short bones, right. So, these are like long bones, you can see short bones near the wrist area, right, and lot of irregular type of bones you can see in the spinal cord area, right. Sesamoid bones you can see near this knee joint, which is called the patella, okay. And then there are some cranial bones, these are mostly like flat bones, right. So, these are different type of bones present in our body. Then structure of long bones, it has mostly few like distinct components which are epiphysis, these are mostly this end area like the end of the long bones. Then you have this middle area which is called the diaphysis. You have like this epiphyseal plate area which is kind of like a connection between the epiphyseal or epiphysis area and the diaphysis area. Then you have a layer which is mostly like a collagen layer and cell layer. This is the periosteum. You can see this is like a hard membrane. Finally, you have the medullary cavity, because all bones, as you know, like there is this cavity present inside of the bone, this is called the medullary cavity, and from the cavity lot of like blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, this kind of ingrow. Why this is important? Because as you know, in this epiphyseal area there is this spongy cancellous part where lot of red bone marrows are present. And what are the function of this red bone marrow? They basically produce the RBC, and through these blood vessels, the capillaries and the lymphatic vessel, what it does basically, it circulates those red bone marrow cells through across our like blood system, and with the lymphatic vessels also is basically acts as a drainage of the waste component, right. So, medullary cavity, lot of marrows are present, and importantly marrows are two type, one is yellow marrow and another is the red bone marrow. We will discuss further about it. And finally, you can see there are articular cartilage area which basically acts as a soft pad or cushion, so that if there are two connective bones or adjacent bones, there is no friction. So, this acts as like a soft pad between the cushion. So, again what are important component then for a long bone? Epiphysis area, where you will find like this soft sponge bone where red bone marrow cells get produced, which basically red bone marrow basically produces the RBC, red blood cells, and then you have this middle area diaphysis, the long part, the shaft part where medullary cavity is there, lot of blood vessels and lymphatic vessels goes through from there. Okay. Then as I said, there are two type of bone marrow, one is yellow type which is mostly contain like fat, right, and it mostly provides the right environment for the bone to function. Fat means it has like adipose type of cells and also it stores triglyceride. Then that means it does not kind of prepare or synthesize the RBC, it mostly gives like a structural integrity, a right environment for the bone to function. And then another type and also importantly the yellow type is present mostly in the middle area, in the medullary cavity of the bone area. And with growing ages, human bones start having like more amount of yellow matter compared to the red type matter. So as the age grows, in the old age, red type of bone marrow get replaced by the yellow type of bone marrow. And next is the red type, which we all know mostly it is present in this end part of the epiphysis area, in the sponge part. There are lot of this red bone marrow is present, they produces the RBC. It is present in the developing bones like in the fetus, right. So two type of bone marrow as you clearly see, one is yellow type and the second is the red type. Then what are the composition of bones, right, is very important. So composition of bones, if you see, you will find like around 25% of water, around 25% of collagen fiber, and rest of the 50% are various crystallized mineral salts. Okay. So the most abundant mineral salt in the bones are calcium phosphate. So you can see Ca3PO4 whole twice is calcium phosphate. It combines with other mineral salt also, for example calcium hydroxide, to form the hydroxyapatite. So this is very important in the bone. Calcium phosphate and calcium hydroxide, once it is combined, it forms hydroxyapatite. As the crystal form, they combine with other mineral salt like calcium carbonate, magnesium, fluoride, potassium and sulfate. We also need to know what are the roles of this, right. So calcium and phosphorus, they make bone extracellular matrix hard. So it kind of acts as a making the bone's extracellular matrix more stronger and harder. Magnesium helps to form the bone extracellular matrix. Fluoride also kind of help in a similar way, it helps to kind of strengthen the bone extracellular matrix. Manganese has a specific role, it activates various enzymes involved in the synthesis of the bone extracellular matrix. So in general you can see all these ions has a significant role in terms of bone development, maturation and strengthening the extracellular matrix of the bone. Then type of bone tissue, there are mostly two types, one is the compact bone which mostly presents like the outer layer of the bone, and then as you go inside of the bone, so this is like the outside part, you will see mostly like the compact bone, and then if you go to the inside part of the bone which is like the sponge bone, it is mostly like softer in nature. Spongy bone is also called as a cancellous bone. So what are the difference between the compact bone and the spongy bone? So compact bone is dense bone found in primarily like the long bones, like a shaft of long bones. It composed of organized structural unit. So compact bone is composed of organized structural unit which is called osteons. Then what are different type of bone cells are present? You can see mostly we have like osteogenic cells. So these are like unspecialized stem cells that undergo like cell division, resulting the formation of the osteoblast. So what happens, basically osteogenic cells are stem type of like stem cells, and when they go like differentiation and division, they form like from osteogenic cells they form osteoblast cell, and this is the main like structural forming cell of the bone, or also it can be called as a bone building cells. What bone building cells or osteoblast does? They basically synthesize and secrete collagen fibers and other organic components that need to build the extracellular matrix of the bone. When the bone cells mature, these osteoblasts they convert to the osteocytes, okay, and the osteocytes basically maintain the metabolism as a daily metabolism. And then in the osteoclast is another type of cells. So basically when it is a growing age, osteoblast number is more, because in the like in the early age when the baby is born, during the early growing age osteoblastic activity is more. Why? Because the baby is growing, we need lot of rapid growth and development, but when the ages and people become old, then this type of osteoclast cell, they are basically monocyte cell. So 50 monocytes basically combine to form a osteoclast cell, and they releases like a powerful like acidic type of lysosomal enzyme to chew off those protein and mineral components. So osteoclast basically destroys the present bone environment, and osteoblast helps into grow the bone environment or building the bone. So as the people gets older and older, osteoclastic activity becomes more compared to the osteoblastic activity, and during the lower ages osteoblastic activity is more, okay. So as the age grows older, the osteoclastic activity become more. In the early ages osteoblastic activity is more than the osteoclast, okay. So hope you understood how the bone cells kind of work in terms of building it and destroying the old grown cells. Then finally bone growth. Two basically like the bone growth or the process how the bone grows is called ossification. Two type of mechanism is there. One is intramembranous ossification, which happens mostly in the early ages, where the steps you can see are like development of the ossification center, calcification, formation of the trabeculae, and development of the periosteum. And second mechanism is the endochondral ossification, which happens mostly in the growing ages. What are different type of stages for the endochondral ossification? Is the development of the cartilage model, then second step is the growth of the cartilage model, then third is development of the primary ossification center, development of the medullary cavity, next is the development of secondary ossification center, and finally formation of the articular cartilage and the epiphyseal plate. We will see how it happens. To the calcification, it grows into a full bone where both yellow marrow, red bone marrow it starts. And then there are few law related to bone, mostly is the Wolff law. So bone basically has a beautiful load bearing application, and once you apply the stress to bone, it adjusts in that environment. So any pressure you apply to bone, the bone will adapt itself into that pressure situation or into the stress situation, and with that pressure, with that gravity, with that weight, the bone becomes more stronger and adaptive. But if you remove the pressure, for example, if you remove the pressure from the bone, it becomes much more brittle, okay. So this is called Wolff's law, that bones remodify or remodel themselves in the applied stress or pressure, and in turn it becomes more adaptive and its strength also increases, okay. So and that is why the sports person who does like running, swimming, cycling, they will have much more, and even like weightlifting, they will have much more stronger bone. Finally, there are few things interesting fun fact. So orthodontic, so you see like orthodontics, This is the branch of dentistry, right, concerned in between like examining like the tooth, jaws, and this is a ever going field nowadays, right. And you see like in response to this artificial stress, osteoclast and osteoblast remodel the sockets so that teeth align properly. So, once stress is applied, there are osteoblastic and osteoclastic activity that remodel the socket, and this is the activity question for all of you. Like do you know, like if the astronaut goes to the space and they start losing the bone weight and bone density, why so? Why does this happen? You try to read about it and try to find out the answer. Okay, why astronaut start to lose like the bone density and bone mass. Okay, thank you. So, I hope like you enjoyed the bone class. So, in detail we discussed about various type of bones, total how many bones are present, 206, and then we discussed different types of the bones, different composition of the bone, how the bone cells growth, the osteoblastic and the osteoclastic activity, right, and finally also we discussed few fun fact. So, I hope you enjoyed these classes of bone, and let us meet in the next class with another subject. Thank you.